Aslan is nearer. Edmund, meanwhile, had been having a most disappointing time. When the draft had gone to get the sledge ready, he accepted that the witch would start being nice to him, as she had been at their last meeting. But she said nothing at all, and when at last Edmund plucked up his courage to say, "Please, your Majesty, could I have some Turkish delights? You said," she answered, "silence, fool." Then she appeared to change her mind and said, as if to her, "And yet it will not do to have the bread fainting on the way," and once more clapped her hands. Another draught appeared. "Bring the human creature food and drink," she said. The draught went away and presently returned, bringing it iron bowl with some water in it, an iron plane with a hunk of dry brown on it. He grinned in a repulsive manner as she set them down on the floor beside Edmund and said, "Turkish delight for the little prince, ha ha ha!" "Take it away," said Edmund sulkily. "I don't want dry bread." But the switch suddenly turned on him with such a terrible expression on her face that he apologized and began to nibble at the bread, thought it was so stale he could hardly get it down. "You may get glad enough of it before you taste bread again," said the witch. While he was still chewing away, the first row came back and announced that the sledge was ready. The White Witch rose and went out, ordering Edmund to go with her. The snow was again falling as they came into the country yard, but she took no notice of that and made Edmund sit beside her on the sledge. But before they drove off she called more grim, and he came bounding like an enormous dog to the side of the sledge. "Take with you the swiftest of your wolves and go on at once to the house of the Brewers," said the switch, "and kill whatever you find there. If they are already gone, then may all speed to the stone table, but do not be seen. Wait for me there in hiding. I meanwhile must go many miles to the west before I find a place where I can drive across the river. You may overtake these humans before they reach the stone table. You will know what to do if you find them." "I hear and obey, O Queen," growled the wolf, and immediately he shot away into the snow and darkness as quickly as horse can gallop. In a minute he had called another wolf and was with him down on the dam and sniffing at the bear's house, but of course they found it empty. It would have been a dreadful thing for the beaver and the children if the night had remained fine, for the wolves would then have been able to follow their trail at 10 to 1 and would have overtaken them before they had got to the cave. But now that the snow had begun again, the sand was cold and even the footprints were covered up. Meanwhile, the draft whipped up the reindeer, and the witch and Edmund drove out under the archway and on the way into the darkness and the cold. This was a terrible journey for Edmund, who had no coat. Before they had been going quarter in an hour, all the front of him was covered with snow. He soon stopped trying to shake it because as quickly as he did that, a new load gathered and he was so tired. Soon he was wet to skin and Oh, how miserable he was! It didn't know, as if the witch intended to make him a king. All the things he had said to make himself believe that she was good and kind, and that her side was really the right side sounded to him silly now. He would have given anything to meet the others at this moment, even Peter. The only way to comfort himself now was to try to believe that the whole thing was a dream, and that he might wake up at any moment. And as they went on, hours after hours, it did come to seem like a dream. This lasted longer than I could describe, even if I wrote page and page about it. But I will skip on to the time when the snow had stopped and the morning had come, and they were uh, racing along in the daylight. And still they went on and on with no sound but the everlasting switch of the snow and the uh, creaking of the reindeer harness. And then at last the switch said, "What have we here? Stop!" And they did. How Edmund hoped she was going to say something about breakfast, but she had stopped for quite a different reason. A little way off at the roof of a tree sat a merry party, a squirrel and his wife with their children, and two satyrs, and a dwarf and an old dog fox, all on stools round a table. Edmund couldn't quite see what they were eating, but it smelled lovely, and they seemed to be decorating of holly, and he wasn't at all sure that he didn't see something like a plum pudding. At the moment when the sledge stopped, the fox, who was obviously the oldest person present, had just risen to its feet, holding a glass in its right paw as if it was going to say something. But when the whole party saw the sledge stopping and who was in it, all the gaiety went out of their faces. The father squirrel stopped eating with his fork halfway to his mouth, and one of the stars stopped with its fork actually in its mouth. And the baby squirrels squeaked with terror. "What is the meaning of this?" asked the witch queen. Nobody answered. "Speak, warning," she said again, "or do you want my dwarf to find to your tongue with his whip? What is the meaning of all this gluttony, this waste, this self-indulgence? Where did you get all these things?" "Please, your majesty," said the fox, "we were given them, and if I might make so bold as to drink your majesty very good health." "Who gave them to you?" said the witch. "Father Christmas," stammered the fox. "What?" roared the witch, springing from the sledge and taking a few strides nearer to the terrified animals. "He has not been here. He cannot have been here. How dare you? But no. Say you have been lying, and you shall even now be forgiven." At the moment one of the young squirrels lost its head completely. He has," it squeaked, beating its little spoon on the table. Edmund saw the witch bite her lips, so that a drop of blood appeared on her white cheek. Then she raised her wang. "Oh, don't, please don't!" shouted Edmund. But when, while he was shouting, he had raised her wand, and instantly where the merry party had been, there were only statues of creatures on with its stone fork fixed forever halfway to its stone mouth, seated round a stone table on which there were stone planet and a stone plum pudding. As for you, said the witch, giving Edmund a stunning blow on the face as she remoted the sledge, let them teach you to ask Pharaoh for spies and traitors. Drive on, and Edmund, for the first time in this story, felt sorry for someone beside himself. It seemed so pitiful to think of those little stone figures sitting there all the silent days and all the dark nights, year after year, till the moss grew on them, and at last even their faces crawled away. Now they were steadily racing on again, and stood Edmund noticed that the snow which splashed against them as they rushed through it was much wetter than it had been all last night. At the same time, he noticed that he was feeling much less cold. It was also becoming foggy. In fact, every minute it grew foggier and warmer, and the sledge was not running nearer as well as had been running up till now. At first, he thought it was because the reindeer were tired, but soon he saw that couldn't be the real reason. The sled jerked and skidded and kept on jolting as if it had struck against stone. And however the draft whipped the poor reindeer and the sledge went slower and slower. There also seemed to be a serious noise all round them, but the noise of their driving and jolting and the drafts shouting at the reindeer prevented Edmund from hearing what it was until suddenly the sledge stuck so fast that it wouldn't go on at all. When that happened, there was a moment's silence, and in the silence Edmund could at last listen to the other noise properly, a strange, sweet, rustling, chattering noise, and yet not so strange, for he'd heard it before, if only he could remember where. Then all at once he did remember. It was the noise of running water. All round them, sort of out of sight, there were streams, chattering, murmuring, bubbling, splashing, and even, it is the distance, roaring. And his heart gave a great leap, thought he hardly knew why, when he realized that his roast was over, and much nearer there was a drip, drip, drip from the branches of all these trees. And then, as he looked at one tree, he saw a great load of snow slide off it, and for the first time since he had entered Narnia, he saw the dark green of a fir tree. But he hadn't time to listen or watch any longer, for the witch said, "Don't sit straight, fool! Get out and help!" And of course Edmund had to obey. He stepped out into the snow, but it was really only slush by now, and began helping the draft to get the sledge out of the muddy hole it had got into. They got it out in the end, and by being very cruel to the reindeer, the draft managed to get it on the move again, and they drove a little further. And now the snow was really melting in earnest, and patches of green grass were beginning to appear in every direction. Unless you have looked at a wad of snow as long as Edmund had been looking at it, you will hardly be able to imagine that a relief those green patches were after the handles wide. Then the sledge stopped again. "It's no good, your Majesty," said the dwarf. "We can't sledge in this the world." "Then we must walk," said the witch. "We shall never overtake them walking," growled the dwarf. Not with the stay they've got. "Ah, you my counselor or my slave," said the witch. "Do as you're told. Tie the hand of the human creature behind it, and keep hold of the end of the rope, and take your whip, and cut the harness of the reindeer they find their own way home." The dwarf obeyed, and in a few minutes Edmund found himself being forced to walk as fast as he could, with his hands tied behind him. He kept on slipping in the slush and mud and wet grass, and every time he slipped the draft gave him a curse and sometimes a flick with the whip. The switch walked behind the dwarf and kept on saying, "Father, father." Every moment the patch of green grew bigger and the patch of snow grew smaller. Every moment more and more of the trees shook of their robes of snow. Soon, wherever you looked, instead of well-shaped, you saw the dark green of firs, or the black prickly branches of bare oak and beeches and elm. Then the mist turned from wild to gold, and presently clearer away altogether. Sniffed of delicious sunlight struck down onto the forest floor, and overhead you could see a blue sky between the tree tops. Soon there were more wonderful things happening. Coming suddenly round a corner into a glade or seaway bridge trees, Edmund saw the ground covered in all directions with little yellow flowers, calendars. As the noise of water grew louder, presently they actually crossed a stream. Beyond it they found snowdrops growing. "Mind your own business," said the dwarf when he saw that Edmund had turned his head to look at them, and he gave the rope a vicious yank. But of course this didn't prevent Edmund from saying. Only 5 minutes later he noticed a dozen crosses growing around the foot of an old tree, gold and purple and white. Then came a round even more delicious than the sound of the water. Close beside the path they were following a bird suddenly chirped from the branch of a tree. It was answered by the chirp of other bird a little farther off, and then if that had been a signal, there was chattering and chirping in every direction, and then a moment of full song, and within 5 minutes the whole wood was ringing with birds' music, and whenever Edmund's eyes turned he saw birds alighting on branches, or sailing overhead, or chasing one another, or having their little quarrel, or tidying up their feathers with their beaks. "Faster, faster!" said the witch. There was no trace of the fog now. The sky became bluer and bluer, and now there were in white clouds hurrying across it from time to time. In the wide glades there were primroses. A light breeze sprang up, with scattering drops of moisture from the swaying branches and carried cool, delicious scents again the faces of the travelers. As the trees began to come fully alive, the branches and branches were covered with green, the laburnum with gold. Soon the beech trees had put forth their delightful, transparent leaves as the travelers walked under them. The light also became green. A bee buzzed across their path. "This is "No, so," said the raft, suddenly stopping. "This is spring. What were to do? Your winter has been destroyed, I tell you. This is Aslan doing." "If either of you mentions that name again," said the witch, "he has instantly be killed." Part 12. Peter's First Battle. While the dwarfs and the white witch were saying this, miles away the beavers and the children were walking on hours after hours into what seems a delicious dream. Long ago they had left the courts behind them, and by now they had been stopped, saying to another, "Look, there's a kingfisher, or I say bluebells, or what was lovely smell, or just listen to that thrush." They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight into cool, green thickets and out again into white mossy glades where tall elms raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into dense masses of flowering currants, and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. They had been just as surprised at Edmund when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. They hadn't even known as certain as which did that this was what would happen when Aslan came to Narnia. But they all knew that it was her spells which spring began, that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong with the witch's screams. And after the show had been going on for some time, they all realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that they didn't hurry so much, and they allowed themselves more rest and longer ones. They were pretty tired by now, of course, but now what I'd call bitterly tired, only slow and feeling very dreamy and quiet inside, as one does when one is coming to the end of a long day in the open. Susan had a slight blister on one heel. They had left the course of the big river some time ago, for one had to turn a little to the right. That means a while to the south, to reach the place of the stone table. Even if it had not been their way, they couldn't have kept to the river valley once a draw began, for with all that melting snow, the river was soon in the flood, a wonderful roaring, thundering yellow flood, and their path would have been under water. And now the sun got low, and the light got redder, and the shadows got longer, and the flowers began to think about closing. "Not long you," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading the until across some very deep, springly moss. It felt nice under their tired feet, in a place where only tall trees grow, very wide apart. The climb coming at the end of the long day made them all pant and blow, and just as Lucy was wondering whatever she could really get to the top without another long rest. Suddenly they were at the top, and this is what they saw. They were on a green open space from which you could look down on the forest spreading as far as one could see in every direction, except right ahead. There, far to the east, was something twinkling around moving. "By gum!" whispered Peter and Susan. "The sea!" In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great gleam slab of grey stone supported on four upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strong lines and figures that might be the letters on an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. The night thing they saw was a pavilion pitched on one side of the open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, and especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with sides of that looked like yellow silk, and courts of crimson and tanned pearls on ivory, and high above in a pole a banner with bow and rod rampant lion fluttering in the breeze which was blowing in their faces from the far off sea. While they were looking at this, they heard a sound of music on their right, and turning in the direction as they walked, they had some to see. Aslan stood in the center of the crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves round him in the shape of the half moon. There were three women there, and well women drying and naids as they used to be called in our world, who had stringed instruments. It was they were had made the music. There were four great centaurs. The horse part of this was like huge English horses, and the man part was like storm but beautiful giants. There was also a unicorn and a bull with the head of a man, and a pelican and an eagle and a great dog, and next to Aslan stood two leopards, of whom one carried his crown and the other in his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beaver and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a scene can be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were sure of it now. For when they tired to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great, royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes, and they found they couldn't look at him and went up trembling. "Go on," whispered Mr. Beaver. "No," whispered Peter, "you first." "No, sons of Adam before animals," whispered Mr. Beaver back again. "Susan," whispered Peter, "what about you? Ladies first." "No, you are the eldest," whispered Susan, and of course the longer they went on doing this, the more awkward they felt. Then at last Peter realized that it was up to him. He drew out his sword and raised it to the salute, and hastily saying to the others, "Come on, pull yourself together," he advanced to the lions and said, "We can come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he, Beaver, and she, Beaver." His voice was deep and rich, and somehow took the figure out of them. They now felt glad and quiet, and it didn't seem awkward to them to stand to say nothing. "But where is the fourth?" asked Aslan. "He has tried to betray them and joined the White Witch." "Oh, Aslan," said Mr. Beaver, and then something made Peter say, "That was partly my fault, Aslan. It was angry with him, and I think that held him to go wrong. And Aslan said nothing either to excuse Peter or to blame his, but merely stood looking at him with his great unchanging eyes. And it seemed to all of them that there was nothing to be said. "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "As shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment Lucy had begun thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly came into her head that he looked sad as well. But next minute that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible paws, thought Lucy, if she didn't know how to velvet them, and said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared, ladies. Take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw and thought it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulders, and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off side of the castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his swords still dwarfed in this hand, went with the lion of the Easter eggs of the Hilton. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their back. They meant that the whole country below them lay in the evening light, forest and hill and valleys, and winding away like a silver snake, the lowermost part of the great river. And beyond all this, mile away was the sea, and beyond the sea the sky full of clouds which were just turning rose color with the reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact at the mouth of the great river, there was something on a white hill shining. It was shining because it was a castle, and of course the sunlight was reflected from all the windows which looked toward Peter and the sunset, but to Peter it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. "That, oh man," said Aslan, "is a Keir, parallel of the four thrones, in one of which you must sit as king. I show it you because you are the firstborn, and you will be high king over all the rest." And once more Peter said nothing, for at the moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. "It is your sister horn," said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, so low as to be almost a purr, if it is not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment Peter did not understand. Then, when he saw all the other creatures start forward and heard Aslan say, with a wave of his paw, "Back! Let the prince win!" he sprang. He didn't understand and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion, and there he saw a dreadful sight. The naiads and dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running toward him as fast as she could. Legs from carry her, and her face was as white as paper. Then she saw Susan make a dash for a tree and swing herself up, followed by a huge grey beast. At first Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw that it looked like an ice Alsatian, thought it was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized that it was a wolf standing on its hind legs, with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on his back stood up to end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the sounds his branch. One on her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or two above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she did not get higher, or at the least take a better grip. Then he realized that she was just going to faint, and that if she fainted, she would fall off. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick, but that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. That stroke never reached the wolf. Quacker's light, it turned round, its eyes flaming, and its mouth wide open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, thought all his happened too quickly for Peter to think at all. He had just time to duck, have and plunged his swords as hard as could, but the brute's phalanx into a heart then came a horrible, confused moment like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive or dead, and its barren teeth knocked against his forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat of his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then after a bit Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say there wasn't kissing and crying on both sides, but in Narnia no one think any the worse of you for that. Quick, quick, shouted the voice of Aslan. Centaurs, eagles, I see another wolf in the thickets there behind you. He has just darted away after him of all you. He will be going to his mistress. Now it's a chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth of the son of Adam. And instantly, with a thunder of hoots and beating of wings, a dozen soul sweets creating disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. You have forgotten to clear your sword, said Aslan. It was true. Peter flushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it all streamed with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it out quite clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam, said Aslan, and when Peter had done so he struck him with the flat of the sledge and said, Rise up, Sir Peter Wolfsbane, and whatever happens, never forget to wipe your swords.